Oh, hello, I didn't see you there. My name is Abe Hunter, and I'm the founder of the Elite Society, and I'm joined as always by my trusty co host, Richard Olarsaba, who's joining us from sunny Florida as usual. Richard, how
Oh
are you?
yeah, wonderful. The weather's beautiful out today.
And Richard, would you be so kind as to introduce our guest today?
Yes, no, very very happy to introduce a wonderful guest that we have today, Melanie Bacaling. Thank you so much for being with us, Melanie.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And how's the weather where you're at?
I'm currently in Kansas City, and today we have a very stormy day. It's supposed to be thunderstorming for the entire day, so a little bit gloomy, but provides a lot of like nice deflected light. So I can't argue with that.
I mean, if anybody has to find a silver lining in in Tornado Alley, go right ahead.
Right. I'll take the nice lighting for that.
So, Melanie, I'm so happy that you're here with us. You were actually suggested to be on the show by our mutual friend Matthew Ozawa, and our heart goes out to him. He's working now, so good for him.
Yeah.
But no, so he was telling us a lot about what you and he have been able to do over the span of your relationship, like where you guys met, and how like you've had a kind of unified vision of what the possibilities for opera, and especially in this digital age where we are today, like what the potential is. And could you just give us a little background, just like for our friend Matthew Ozawa, like where did you guys meet?
Yeah. So Matthew, I miss you. I'm sorry you can't be with us today, but I'm so glad that you have work.
Mhm.
Yeah, we met in Santa Fe at the Santa Fe Opera in 2018, my first summer there. And I was a production assistant on the stage management staff. And Matthew was directing Madame Butterfly in that season. And I had known of him before, but hadn't had the pleasure of meeting him, and then found out that he had come into the ranks of directing by route of being a musician and then a stage manager. And I was like, oh, wait a second, that's kind of the trajectory that I'm looking at. And so got to just, I unfortunately wasn't able to work on his show directly, but in passing in the office, and we would just have these wonderful conversations. And then I was actually supposed to assist him and be the assistant director to him for a production of Giulio Cesare, which ended up getting canceled last spring because of the pandemic thing. So we missed that opportunity to work together, but I know that we still have hopes of making that happen one day. And it's been great because through this pandemic, I felt like I've stayed connected. I had him on a podcast that I produced with Boston Lyric Opera called At Its Core. And we've just had a lot of really wonderful conversations about where we want to see the future of opera and what it looks like to be creating in a digital age. And I look up to him very much. So I'm honored that he even thought of me to have this conversation today.
Well, and rightfully so. And as you said, like kind of mirroring Matthew's own trajectory of being a musician, kind of like we people can look back at our archival episode of when we had him on, when he gave us the entire like history of Matthew Ozawa, like talk about a jack of all trades and kind of really finding a path.
Yeah.
And like you said, you had a similar one. Can you give us like the quick trajectory from being a musician to stage management to production to like where you are today?
Yeah, it feels all like an accident. I describe him like, I don't know if I'm really supposed to be here, but I really like what I'm doing. So I'll greatly take that path. But yeah, so I got my degrees in undergrad were in psychology and vocal performance.
Oh,
I
God,
thought
that's
I wanted to,
perfect. You can
that
psychoanalyze the
psych degree.
singers. I love it.
I'm my own therapist.
Truly. I think I have not found a moment when having a psych degree has ever not been a positive experience in a production process. So I'm very grateful for that background. But when I was an undergrad, I studied abroad in Salzburg, Austria, and got to really have a wonderful moment researching Mozart's music, and was like, I didn't think that I wanted to go the singing route further and with opera, but this is really, really intriguing me. So let me look into grad school. And I went to grad school at the Boston Boston Conservatory studying vocal pedagogy and performance, thinking I was going to go more of the singing, teaching, actually voice science route. I was really, and I'm still very much a nerd about the vocal mechanism and rehabilitating injured singers. And so I was like, oh yeah, I'm totally gonna like work at Mass General Hospital and be a rehabilitator for injured singers. And while I was in grad school, I started working with director Nathan Troop and really learned that being on the other side of the table was something that interested me in a way that I was like, oh, I can get jobs doing this. Oh, this is really interesting. And I found that my passion for creating the art was greater than my passion for wanting to be on stage or be singing. I just wanted to be in the room where it happened, so to speak. And from that, ended up getting an internship in stage management and learning about being a stage manager. I was like, oh, I can put like my organizational skills on and still like get to be in the room making it happen. And then I ended up working with Boston Lyric Opera, actually first as a rehearsal room assistant, where I was sweeping and mopping the floors of their rehearsal room, and then ended up doing some super title work for them, and then started working my way up and being a production assistant, and then assistant stage manager, and then assistant director, emerging artist. So I owe a lot of my growth to that company for letting me, you know, be trusted in these positions and just kind of making it up as I go, because that's what it felt like. I'm like, I just really like opera, you guys. Thanks for letting me be in the room. And then that has turned into me working at Santa Fe Opera, and I'm heading off to LA Opera in the fall to join the stage and act there. Hopefully, if we can do things in person. And with Boston Lyric Opera during this time, I've been their project and digital content producer, I think is my title. We just kind of made something up again, but to helping curate what does creating, especially for an opera company, in a digital landscape look like. So it's been wonderful to be a part of that team and help problem solve in that regard. So that was yeah.
No, I was going to say, I'm like, to sum up, from what I heard, from what you just said right there, you're talking about an extensive background, humble beginnings, and just loads of opportunity. And so, like, this is a little chapeau for anybody out there who loves music, loves being a singer, maybe doesn't want to do it all the time, but still wants to be involved in the arts.
Or a pianist.
Talk to her. Or a pianist. Anybody. Like, this is how you can do it. There's literally
there are other ways to be involved.
Yes.
And be passionate about
proof positive, Melanie. Thank you.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
love your story.
Thank you. It's one of those things where I had to take the leap of faith to say I want to be a freelance artist, in a way that I was like, I'm not really a stage manager, because it took me a while to really identify as one, because I felt like, again, I was making it up and wasn't fully trained in it. So I'm like, I'm just learning as I go, and very eager to learn, and putting tools in my tool belt is how it's felt, is just taking the opportunities that feel right and putting the tools in there. But the fact that I can say that I am somebody who full-time makes money off of doing art and supports myself in that way, and like, it's not the easiest thing, but I don't have to have a side hustle or anything. Like, my full time is working in the arts, and especially the fact that I've been able to be employed throughout this pandemic has been the biggest blessing, and I'm so incredibly grateful for that. And I would never have imagined that this is the route that I would end up taking. If I asked myself 5 years ago after graduating from grad school if this is where I would be, I would not believe myself. But the fact that this is where I am, and I feel like I've constantly stayed true to my own goals and my passions, I'm incredibly grateful.
I think it would be amazing if, in the theater aspect of opera, to have somebody that speaks the musical language. So, I mean, that to me is just like a natural pairing.
Yeah. And, I was having this conversation with another stage management colleague earlier in the week about how, we've all been a part of those productions where things just go wrong. You've got personalities in the room. It's just like, why am I doing this? And bringing back that why of, I love this art. And even if it's like not something that a show that, you're particularly passionate about with the music or whatever, but going back to that moment of, if I'm standing backstage with my score and just taking in the moment of listening to a live orchestra or listening to, a powerhouse singer just do their thing, there's nothing like that visceral feeling you get from being around that. And it can make all of those really difficult productions, sometimes worth it to return to that.
Underscoring sometimes.
Right, yeah.
But I mean, how amazing, just like I said, with like all of your background, all the interests that you have to really kind of create your own opportunities and, like essentially fill a void that maybe we always were looking for, asking for, where, you can actually talk to somebody who has some sort of expertise in like the psychology part. I think, like we said before, like underscore that. I think it's, we kind of talk about like the healthy levels of crazy that every musician has. It's just like you kind of have to be out there just to do it.
100%, yes.
But like, to have that understanding, to have that empathy and sympathy, like from your workforce, I mean, how great would that be? And like kind of summing up like all of these, this trajectory that you've had, that when it comes to the pandemic, a lot of us have kind of shared our stories of how we've had to pivot and maybe pick up different skills. And you essentially were doing that before it was necessary. You're saying just like, well, let me, even though you kind of joke about it and saying that it's like, I'm just making it up as I go. Aren't we all kind of?
Truly,
especially now, but I mean, like,
speak for yourself,
like,
Richard.
True. I was gonna say, like, we have the expert over there in Minneapolis right now. So I'm just the lowly, I'm improving everything that I do. No, but like what, kind of turning this into a PSA for young people who want to contribute to the arts and maybe don't know exactly where they would fit in.
Yeah.
What did you actually have to do to tell yourself, what don't I know and how do I actually learn about it to fulfill this job?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think a lot of my insecurities early on when I decided to go full-time freelance and explore what it's like to be a production artist, I bring the art into what I do, so I have a hard time categorizing myself in that way. But to be a production artist, the insecurities of, I don't have a formal background in this, or I didn't take an electrics class, so I don't know how to hang a light or whatever. Not that that's something that you need to do as a stage manager, but I definitely was encountering colleagues who had this formal education. And the best thing that I did for myself was not be afraid to ask questions when I needed to. And I'm forever indebted to the many mentors that I've developed over my time, and those who weren't afraid to be like, no, you actually need to cue a singer on stage and tell them stand by and go. And I remember my mind was blown when I first learned that. I'm like, wait, the opera singers aren't responsible for their own entrances, like, because I had just known about theater stage management prior to that. And just like, okay, noted, copy, thank you. I will give my standbys and goes now. And now that's like one of my favorite things to do. But to not be ashamed to ask questions and embrace the fact that I was learning on the job. But at the same time, working really hard and showing up and being a good colleague, and working towards, the collaborative effort in the room. And that's probably one of my favorite things about what I do, is the creating something from nothing with a singular group of people that you'll never really get to recreate again. Just like the ephemeral nature of the creation process, I find really beautiful. And so I let that kind of lead my passion. So I'd say to anyone who is trying to figure out like what their path is in the artistic world, don't limit yourself, and permission to explore, and know that there's like no one right way to do something, and asking questions can be a really powerful way to learn.
Yeah. So among your many talents, and like you said, like over the course of the pandemic, your work has kind of changed. And like you said, getting into production side of things, you've actually been very active on like a virtual platform, and like to the point with your work with Boston Lyric Opera. It, from what I saw and everything that you and I had talked about prior to the show, is that you were very instrumental in helping craft a new kind of platform for BLO and creating content and creating a like I said, a platform to actually have not even just the musical content, but multiple things, like similar to these kind of chat shows and offering up perspectives. And that's was that the Voice Box, or what's it called again?
OperaBox.tv.
OperaBox, yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes.
yeah. So it's funny because to think about this now, especially around like this 1 year anniversary mark that we're all being super reflective on. I was working on a production of Norma with BLO, and I was assistant directing and supposed to be turning into the calling stage manager for the actual run of the show. And we were only able to do our final dress rehearsal and thankfully able to record that because the leadership of the company kind of foresaw that we would need to do something in a digital capacity. And I remember having the conversation with, she's now currently the artistic, let me think about this. Director of Artistic Operations is her title, Jessica Johnson Brock. And she pulled me aside and was like, hey, can we have a conversation about like what you think a digital world might look like when it comes to opera? And I was like, what are we talking about? Like, we can't be, I just remember being totally mind boggled by the fact that we might not be able to be in person together. And the fact that even before the shutdown happened, they were already asking themselves these questions. And Brad Bernardo was also very instrumental in that and has been instrumental for the company. He's the chief operating officer, but it was just named actually as of last week, the acting artistic and general director. And the fact that they had the foresight to say, let's have a conversation with whomever about what this looks like and truly, to make up a new game, more or less. So through a lot of different conversations and even ones that I wasn't necessarily a part of, they created OperaBox.tv, and it's a streaming platform that, we are able to offer our content on, that kind of acts like as a very mini Netflix of sorts, that we now have The Fall of the House of Usher on, which was a stop motion hybrid animated film of Philip Glass's opera. Really incredible. Highly recommend everybody go check it out, because that is something that I think can really show what it's like to bring true cinema in with digital opera. And I was grateful enough to be able to be a part of that recording process and help figure that out. But it took, an instrumental team, and James Dara has been really monumental in helping also usher that together, not just with The Fall of the House of Usher, but with an upcoming new mini opera series that's coming up called Desert Inn. And it's just completely reimagining what is opera and how we can take a art form that already has existed in a digital sphere, so film, and what does it look like to marry those two things together. So being a part of those conversations and actually exploring, what does this look like, and something that we've never done before as a company, but also not many opera companies have done before, has been a really interesting journey to be on.
And to your credit, as I said, like the history that you shared with BLO, like you said, going from your origins of sweeping up the stage and everything, all the way up to, tell me again what your actual position like on the production side is again.
Currently, the production and digital content producer, and then underneath that, we have also created this position of company intimacy advocate, which is a position that I have throughout the regular season, and that we still have, even though we're not in the actual full production mode. But it's a position that they created 2 seasons ago when they were working on both The Handmaid's Tale and The Rape of Lucretia, so 2 operas that include incredibly graphic, potentially graphic, violent sexual scenes. And they had choreographers involved, what they wanted as a company to figure out how to better advocate for the artists in the room. And so it was a conversation with the production manager at the time and myself of, well, let's create this position who's essentially somebody that can be a point person that represents the company, but is also in the room at all times, to help be an advocate for the artists and help make sure that we are actually creating as safe a place as we can for especially these very intimate scenes, and that we're asking for consent and we're giving consent. And that was another instance of kind of making things up, because there aren't any companies that have that position yet. I'm hoping that it might maybe become a trend, but talking about staging intimacy in opera only recently, and I think partially because of the pandemic, more people have been thinking about it, because they're able to take workshops and intimacy directors and coordinators has become a more popular company to follow. But what does it look like to get an intimacy director in the opera rehearsal room? I could talk forever about this, but
No, and I think we should. I definitely don't want to lose base of like what the production side of what you're contributing to BLO and kind of what that looks like. But since we're on the subject of having an intimacy director or like it's this concept for any of our audience who aren't involved in theater, that when it came to opera, it was kind of a slow trend to actually even bring it up, let alone have official positions like yourself. And there's, I think we cited in Minnesota Opera, they have an actual position for it on the ground when they're doing productions that you actually can raise the question of how to approach intimate moments in theater, because for so much of like the history of theater, especially in opera, it was one of those, we'll get to it when we get there, and usually we're on such a tight schedule that we kind of just address it between the people that are involved. And then at best, like say for instance, if you're doing a staging of Rape of Lucretia, at best it's a closed rehearsal for that one scene while we're trying to discover it, while we're trying to get everyone comfortable with what is actually happening, to then put it on stage for a wider audience. That it's coming. It's coming when it comes to opera, and I'm glad that you have been able to kind of like again fill a position that may not have been required, but is definitely appreciated where we are today. And much like what the pandemic has kind of helped in the arts, is this reflection both from a equity standpoint, but also like in the sense of not just race relations and those kind of questions that have kind of gone unanswered for a long time, but also talking about this the contact between two people. And of course, like you can kind of just leave it to the actors, to the singers on stage to kind of figure it on their own. But something that you and I had talked about before is like, what if, even if you don't have a company that has an official position where somebody does that, if you have someone who's kind of there to be an advisor of some sort, so the company has like a strict set of rules, or like, answer these questions before you move on. Like, as long as we hit the bullet points and we can like check all the boxes and say, we have addressed this, we have addressed consent, we have addressed what safe, like, safe interaction is, like, what can be said, what can't be said. Like, let's just at least talk about it. Cause I think it was one of those conversations for so long that we talked about it in the green room, or griped about it. Cause it was like, well, that rehearsal went too far. But, like, what if we could actually address it beforehand?
Truly. Well, and just like you were saying, how do we create a new standard for what should happen, and taking that responsibility off of the individual artists who we don't know what sort of history and background and trauma they're bringing, because as artists, you're expected to be incredibly vulnerable on stage in order to take on these characters, and you can't just negate the fact that somebody's bringing their own history into the room, like that. Saying that doesn't exist, we're humans. Like, of course we bring in our own experiences to whatever characters that we're embracing. So to not honor that and create at the very least a standard protocol for asking and giving consent, it can be incredibly damaging potentially, depending on the rehearsal room. And I think you're incredibly right that part of the issue is that opera rehearsals traditionally don't have a lot of time, and you're already in a crunch against unions and whatever else to be able to stage like this whole thing within this amount of time. And so and then you talk about like the money of adding another person into the room and all that kind of stuff. There's so many barriers that you have to combat. But at the very least, and especially when we are now even more talking about how do we create equitable spaces, having a standard prior to the rehearsal even starting, and prior to even picking out the show, of saying, hey, this is how as a company we're going to address our anti-racism policies and our anti-sexual harassment policies. And within that, not only do we have these policies, but here are what we commit to as a company for anybody who's going to be in our rehearsal rooms to do or not do. And I think having that precedent set can be incredibly powerful, and only lead to more vulnerability in the rehearsal room.
Truly, like that ability to actually perform with total abandon without having to fear that there will be any like personal repercussions, because
Yeah.
this dialogue has been going on since, you know, like the dawning like of time, really, but since like the Me Too movement really hit like every aspect of society, especially in the US, where it's like, how do we actually approach this? Because any given company can have their standard for like when you're in the building and people who are in the office, but when it comes to the rehearsal room, that's always kind of been like, well, you do your own thing and we don't even know what that is. But I
Yeah.
know there's been a lot of arguments from not a older generation, but just like the traditional way of how things had been done. And I know there are a lot of artists that, even from abroad, that when they see the conversation come up of like creating equitable spaces, especially when it involves like interaction between two people, that automatically it's like, well, this is going to hinder the performance, this is going to hinder the rehearsal process, we're not going to be able to do anything, we can't try things out. And it's like, it you know, not to throw anybody under the bus, but it was that argument, you know, right when the Me Too movement really started hitting the waves, and in certain workspaces the argument was always like, well, now I can't do anything, like I can't
Or I
I
can't say
can't
anything.
I can't say anything. And it's just like, it's not really that. It's literally just, again, like we said, having a standard when you walk in the door. So then there is no question. You don't have to worry about what is, you know, you don't have to worry about like the whole company going through sensitivity training. We can just kind of like state it at the door and be like, sign in.
Here's what we're committing to. Yeah, completely. That attitude is truly what one of the major hindrances is, I think, because part of that I think also plays into this power dynamic that we often have in rehearsal rooms of, you know,
Who's
the
in charge?
hierarchy, who's in charge and who's actually like making the rules. And, you know, we call maestro, and they're the ones who are have the ultimate power. And then you've got the director, and oftentimes, you know, they're a lot of people in those positions who have been in those positions for a long time see adding protocols like this as a threat to their process, which I find to be incredibly interesting, because then it's like, well, are you then that careless in how you do your process that you're not concerned about how you're even, it's the whole intent versus impact
Yeah,
situation. Just because you don't intend to offend anybody doesn't mean that that comment didn't offend someone.
true.
And how do we address it, and how do you then take responsibility as the person in power to address that? And it's just so silly to me that there are people that are resisting that just because, like, oh, it messes with things. And it's just like, why do we have to talk about it? Why do we have to talk about it? We can just do it. But that has led to harm. and the fact that we can't address that, or we aren't addressing that, especially when we're talking about it even more as a society, I think would be a detriment to the future of the art form.
What does your position look like in action in the rehearsal room?
Yeah. So again, that was something that we kind of figured out as we went, but the policies that we ended up having in place were that I would be in the room making sure that whatever scene that we are rehearsing, especially if it is one that is more intense than others, involves it being a closed rehearsal. So making sure that only personnel that need to be there are in the room, making sure that if there's any doors and windows or whatever, that those are covered up. And then making sure that all artists involved are giving and receiving consent for whatever actions are happening. And that also includes if there's a choreographer that's helping make it happen, or the director, and they're like trying stuff out to make sure that, like, hey, may I touch my hand on your throat or something like that. And that was something that we also had to figure out, because in one of the first iterations of this, we were working with a choreographer who comes from the dance world. And very similarly, they're used to just trying stuff and trying them with the artist without saying anything, or naming what it is that they want to do. And so it's just like making sure that that added extra step of naming is part of it. And then having the power in the room to hold a rehearsal should there be any discomfort noted. So I feel like my psychology background has also been incredibly helpful for this, of just like being able to read people's body language and read the way in which they might be receiving something, because I think there's still this notion of an artist, you know, coming in with that yes and attitude, of not wanting to make trouble because they don't want to say no to something, or they don't want to like be, you know, the problem. And so just kind of keeping tabs on that, and having the power to say hold if perceiving any sort of discomfort, or if I were to see that they weren't following the exact thing that was choreographed and staged, having the power to call that out and say like, wait a second, that's not what we said we would do. And then checking in with all the artists involved, both at the beginning and end of rehearsal, to make sure that they're doing okay, feeling okay, and if they have any concerns, just reiterating that I'm somebody that they could go to. And what was really interesting through that process was learning how those little steps were also really really beneficial in rehearsal rooms that didn't necessarily involve like an intense sexual scene or intimate anything, that even just like a stage kiss, being able to say, hey, can we agree, are we marking here, are we not marking here, do you guys have consent, and just taking a second to call that out, even in like a small love scene Norma or something like that, ended up being the more standard protocol. And so this position was actually only created for those two shows we were doing that season, Rip of Lucretia and Handmaid's Tale. But then I actually asked if we could continue having it be a part of the rehearsal process just for everything going forward, because you never know when that can come in handy of making sure that we are asking and receiving consent, because it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's like super intense in order to still create that standard. But then also what it ended up being was that I was approached for other concerns that artists were having, whether that had to be with feeling safe with a prop, or the way that a certain scene was introduced and handled, and how that affected somebody. And it was really incredible to see how powerful it was for the artist to feel like they had somebody watching them and looking out for them in the room, almost like an HR position. Because what you have when you're a company is, you know, your set of rehearsal people who might just all be on contract from production personnel downwards, and you don't necessarily know, or you don't necessarily have, you know, the artistic director in the room at all times. You don't have your person that you usually go to, your point of contact, there as it's happening. And so for there to be a company personnel who is designated as, you know, somebody that is advocating for the artist specifically, I think ended up being a really positive experience through every show that we've done since then. So it's been really interesting to see how beneficial it's been for everyone.
And I think like the end result for anybody who isn't, I won't say like pushing back, but maybe is skeptical of the process and like how it can actually create a new standard, better the environment. Because to the point of having a new set of standards, I do think that the only thing that it can do is illuminate and remove any ambiguity. So there will never be a question of, did this happen? Did it have to happen? Like, I don't know what to do. Because like you said, kind of like for so long as artists, many times we just say yes and continue on, whether it, you know, you may have a question about it or be bothered by it. And therefore you actually are empowering the artist a little more, and you're empowering the entire rehearsal process, because then everyone is actually participating and it's more inclusive. So I know we're kind of like, as a artistic society, we are kind of figuring that out, like how to get those things around, like especially in opera. I will say like opera is kind of like the last kind of pigeonhole that hasn't really been addressed, because you talk about like symphonic ensembles, orchestras, there is a lengthy, like, you know, list of like protections by everybody, that they're like, that thing happened, I didn't like it, I'm telling this person, and they address it. And the rehearsal room has always kind of been nebulous when it came to opera, that it's like, I'm glad it's moving, I know we're still trying to work the kinks out of it, but what if we just kind of like set not even a low bar, let's just set a bar,
any bar,
and then work from there.
Agree.
And the thing is, like with like the work that you're doing, and like I said, I mentioned before, where I know Minnesota Opera has been implementing a person like that it is, you know, we're figuring it out, and I can't wait till we get to a point where it's not incumbent upon the individual artist to have to be responsible for everybody, and including themselves. Like, when we get to that point, like, imagine what the art form could actually like yield from that. So I'm looking forward to that.
Truly, yeah. I've been so grateful for Minnesota Opera to actually have a full on-staff position of an intimacy director. because that's been really instrumental, I think, in the conversation at large. And they're the first company to do that. And seeing, well, we have all these standard protocols for when we hire a fight director. Why not just make that the same thing included in the AGMA CBAs, that these are all of the things that would be required for us to hire an intimacy director? Like, what does that look like? And the fact that we have a company who is taking charge of that, I think, is starting to be part of the game-changing movement.
Yeah. So pivoting real quickly back to the other hat that you wear at BLO, like you said, during this, like the production side of things. Um, like I said, like you were actually very instrumental in creating and producing one of the like chat shows, like actually giving an opportunity for people in the arts to have a dialogue with each other. And we actually have a clip from one of the episodes. Could you talk to us just a little bit and set it up for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is a 3-episode series called We Need to Listen, that was created by Celeste Headley, who is a soprano herself, actually. She's the granddaughter of William Grant Still. She's a journalist, an author, best-selling author, incredible human being. And she had been talking about doing a program like this in some capacity for the past couple of years, actually, with the general and artistic director, Esther Nelson. And they had been wanting to do it for a long time, and it just hasn't launched off. And then here we are in the pandemic, and the Black Lives Matter movement resurgence, and the reckoning of what does equity and anti-racism look like within arts organizations. And so we're like, that sounds like a great time to be having this conversation, to create a platform for it. So we decided to make it digital, and have 3 different episodes that focus on the calling out what all the problems are within the realm of classical music and opera. But Celeste, what I really appreciated about the way she leads the conversations is, how do we actually come up with steps and solutions, and what are the action items to solving these problems that exist? Because there's plenty of conversations happening about what the problems are, but what's a conversation about what are we doing to make it better? And so this premiered in November, and it still lives on operabox.tv, but each episode has a different variety of guests to bring a wealth of experience and perspective to each panel. And so this one is from episode 3, which talks about specifically issues related to audience and audience engagement. And yeah, I'm really jazzed about everything that they say, but specifically this clip is great.
Awesome.
All right, let's roll it.
Know that when the idea of attracting diverse audiences, for example, comes up, some of the things that immediately are spoken about is dress code, which I think is racist. Ticket price, again, pretty racist. The other one are things like norms. Are you supposed to clap between movements of a piece? Do you clap after the ballet in an opera? Do you clap after every aria? Do you clap in the middle of the aria after the tenor sings the high B? So can you talk a little bit about why some of these things that other people have tried in terms of either addressing norms or ticket price and dress code hasn't helped?
Sure. I think that 2 of the 3 things that you just mentioned, dress code and norms, it only matters if we succeed in getting people to the opera house anyways. It leaves out the entire equation of how are we bringing new audiences and new communities to our space and getting them to trust us. And I think that we, as opera companies specifically, I think that, but this applies, I think, to many other art forms, I think that we are too often quick to assume good intent or trust of our actions when we haven't earned it. And if there's not an authentic relationship that already exists with you in a community, it doesn't matter how much you change your norms or your ticket prices. Not that that should matter anyways, but even if that was the reason, even if that was the barrier keeping audiences away, it wouldn't do anything if you didn't have someone the community trusted who said, yes, like I vouch for this company, I vouch for this person who's coming to meet with us. And you should listen to maybe what they have to say, or they're eager to hear what you have to say. And again, I think also traditional marketing hasn't worked because it's been very one directional. You can't just talk at somebody and make them want to come be a part of your family. You have to engage in a dialogue with them. And if there's no mechanism for community to talk back to you and tell you what they're interested in or what they're not interested in, you're not going to learn anything, and you're not going to make ground building that relationship. So I think that the most successful examples I've seen in the arts are when people really try to build a relationship with one person first, and then let that slowly grow into knowing a few people, and then knowing maybe an organization or a community partner, and then through that group start to reach out to a wider network of people. I think it's got to be ground up, it's got to be authentic, it's got to be personal, it can't be corporate, it can't be and it certainly can't be white saviorism. Oh, let me show you what you've been missing, let me show you the joys of our art form. We're so sorry you've been neglected for so long, because nobody wants to be talked to that way.
Testify.
Damn.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll say that was that amazing speaker was An Lei, who is the director of marketing at Opera Theater St. Louis.
Oh my God, I want to be her friend.
Yes, she's amazing.
I mean, we could just talk about like what they were talking about at the show, but your contribution to it, like, wow, like to actually give a platform to have those kind of dialogues and the conversations. And again, with your production hat on, you actually been able to take it outside of Boston. Like you were able to actually help do a virtual production with Opera Omaha, right?
Yeah. So with Opera Omaha, this pandemic time, they've been also, self-reflecting and figuring out what kind of programming they want to do. And so they approached me and soprano Chabrelle Williams to co-curate a series that we ended up calling Amplifying the Black Experience, which was an incredible opportunity to be able to be given a platform in Opera Omaha to say you actually have full artistic autonomy in creating programming under this umbrella, and legitimately to be given that autonomy and not the checking off the box autonomy. It was really incredible. So I'm so grateful to Opera Omaha for that, and it was part of these conversations with the Boston Lyric Opera program that I was thinking about, how do we create programming that is authentic to serving within the Omaha community and not performative and not, just checking off the boxes. And one of the programs that we did earlier on in the season was a panel that featured a whole host of amazing activists and contributors to the opera, but also community members within Omaha who are leaders of different organizations. And one of the women, Rachel D. Fox, is the founder of an organization called You Go Girl, whose mission to inspire and empower young women of the Omaha community. And Chabrelle and I were really moved by her passion and her dedication to that organization specifically, that we knew we definitely wanted to engage with them further and figure out like what kind of programming can we do here. And so with that, one of the videos we ended up creating within the umbrella of this Amplifying the Black Experience program is a video that highlights the dreams of the girls who are a part of this organization. And we were really inspired by the momentous swearing in of Vice President Kamala Harris and what that meant, for women everywhere, that we were like, what can we do for the young women of Omaha? Like what can we do to help highlight them? And so we asked Rachel, we're like, how would you feel about having them featured in a video? And we really wanted to do something with Florence Price music. And so we found Hold Fast to Dreams, and Chabrelle sings it amazingly. And so from that is this video that we created that highlights the dreams of these young women, and paired with this amazing music from a very lesser known Black composer who I wish that I had learned about in school, but unfortunately did not learn about in school. And so this part of the conversation from We Need to Listen was definitely the fuel into how we approached creating this video that we made for Opera Omaha.
Excellent.
And without further ado, here we go. Oh gosh.
Yes, Chabrel.
I know. Sing it.
But wow.
I mean, you can't help but just want to smile and cry during that.
I
It
mean,
was beautiful.
it's so just it's we're talking about inspirational imagery where it's so simple. It is so simple.
Mhm.
And talk about, I mean, the complete opposite of white saviorism. I mean, it was just that getting. Oh my god, I just love it.
And what's so impressive, Melanie, I feel, is with all of like again, I'm totally touting your background, like in how you got to where you are, because honestly, I think every single aspect of it enforces what you do. And you think about like what does producing in classical music mean these days, and it might mean for the sake of like if you're doing an opera production and you say like, well, this is what I want to do, can you show me how to do it? In cases like this, especially with virtual content where you're literally coming at it from nothing, you essentially are creating art. Like as a producer, you are then actually becoming an artist once again. So you didn't get that far away from it.
Truly, and that's how it feels, is needing to really pull on those creative muscles of okay, there's literally the sky's the limit. How do we do this, and how do we do it? And Abe, as you said, and it doesn't need to be anything complex, but just like a really simple honoring of this organization and the girls who are a part of it, and giving voice to hope, I think was something that we were also really looking into, because around the time we were planning this was November time, and it was quite distraught, and we're like, what can we do that speaks to this idea of hope, and actually resonates within the community as well, in a hopefully authentic way. And so pulling the creative muscles to make all of that happen, but letting it be fueled by a strong desire to create a sense of hope within the landscape of things. It's been a really fantastic artistic opportunity for sure, and I see it that
and
way.
and how cool that catering this to Opera Omaha's like their mission statement, not only providing great artistry and great art for not just like a representation of what can be done in this country, but for their own specific community. Um like you said, like this specific like work of saying like highlighting the Black experience. And this goes for anybody. This is like for Black Americans, Mexican Americans, Latino Americans, Asian Americans, like actual like Native Americans. This is anybody that I'm going to steal a quote from my partner, who's a very good voice teacher and is like teaches everybody across the board in this country, that when it comes to equity or creating a more inclusive art form, it's not just about leaving room at your table. It's actually about going to their table. It's pulling a chair up to their table, as opposed to saying like it's exactly what was discussed in the in We Need to Listen that you would help produce, saying like it's not just going out there and saying like, oh, you've been missing out. It's like no. What don't we know
Right.
from your perspective?
There's no condescension. There's no room for condescension.
Yes, like, and what if you actually do more? Again, like this is like I love what has been produced from all of this, like having to pivot from our traditional way of producing art and producing classical music. It's saying like what can we fix? What hasn't been fixed? What have we just kind of like let go on the wayside, saying like that'll be a project to address later on. Like we actually can address it now.
Right. And that's what, there's not much that we can say by the grace of the pandemic, but truly, one of, I think, the silver linings of taking a time to pause is the fact that we're forced to have these conversations now. And, with the great work like the Black Opera Alliance and what they're doing, in creating accountability now for all these companies in something that should have been addressed, a long time ago. But the fact that now everyone is feeling empowered to hold each other accountable and have these conversations and call out all the things that are call in, as we've been talking about, all of the things that need work and need to change. I think there's been the opportunity to pause and actually address that and look internally and do the work and do, you know, the anti-racism training that I feel like I'm sure a lot of companies are like, we're just too busy to get it done. And now, surprise,
You have
we got
time.
some time. Exactly.
So looking forward, either just like in the immediate future or even like post-pandemic, where I'm excited to see where you will end up, or like how you will have, where you will like draw your influences and everything. But like, where do you want to see yourself contributing, or how do you want to see yourself contributing in the future?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and one that I've been asking myself a lot recently. So I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? But I've always had a desire to eventually, way longer down the road, be in more of an executive leadership position. And again, my passion is in making the art happen and also helping create the change and being an agent for change, in whatever way that means. In the immediate future, I'm really, really excited to get back into the rehearsal room. And I'm hoping that that means more opportunities to, you know, stage manage, assistant direct, direct maybe, and continue taking the opportunities that feel like I'm putting the tools in my tool belt, because ultimately, if I can one day, you know, be in charge of my own company or take over a company or something like that, that I'll be able to come at it with a wealth of experience, and having been able to flex a lot of different muscles, which is what I feel like I've been grateful enough to have, even in these pandemic times, is the opportunity to explore more and learn more and let my passion lead me in the work that I do, and just kind of hope to keep being a change maker is what the ultimate goal is.
Get it?
I don't think you'll have to worry about that.
Right. I was gonna say, like, whenever the letterhead comes out, you know, like Melanie Bacaling, like executive director or something, or like, you know, general director, like you'll be getting a call from me. I will want to be a part of that team in any way I can.
I will gladly have you be a part of the team. Absolutely. I just want to work with all the great people who are making the change, and it's amazing. And thank you for this platform and for having all these conversations. I think it's platforms like these where we're actually having authentic conversations with each other in this kind of way is what helps make that change. So kudos to both of you for this programming.
Well, it's because we get to talk to great guests like you that we get to have these conversations. And thank you, Matthew Ozawa, for
Yes, thank you, Matthew.
the hot tip.
Right? Yeah. I know, we'll have to ask him for more. It was just like, clearly this one worked out, and like we'll probably be having you back at some later time, Melanie, because
I would be honored.
Because we've only like touched like, you know, we've only addressed the tip of the iceberg on this one.
There's room for several more episodes, I think.
I would be honored to be a part of anything.
Well, we've talked for an hour here, and this is the time of our show when we give you the opportunity to give shout outs to whomever you'd like.
Oh,
I'm going to play the theme music, and you get to go now.
Okay, first of all, shout out to Matthew Ozawa for giving me this opportunity, introducing me to these two wonderful humans. So what a joy is that? And I will also give a shout out to, I already mentioned his name, but Nathan Troop. He's been really instrumental in empowering me to take on all the opportunities that I've had and helping introduce me to people. So I owe a lot of my success to him. So my two shout outs.
Yay.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you next time on the Roundtable. Richard? Good work.
That's a wrap. What more needs to be said?
Nothing. We can just enjoy the rest of our afternoon now. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.